Well, good morning, everyone. My name is John Rychtarik. I'm the Vice President of the South Dakota Art Museum Guild. And I would like to welcome all of you this morning, all the members and the guests. And I guess I am the program this morning. If you logged on to hopefully hear from Don Manolo, who is actually scheduled for this morning. He had a family emergency and he was not able to give his presentation. So I didn't want to cancel the program, so I volunteered myself to give this talk on Harvey Dunn that I presented at the South Dakota State Historical meeting a couple of years ago. And so this is the program that I presented with a few minor changes, but I hope you enjoy it. It covers a lot and probably more than it should, and I hope I don't run out of time. And so I'm going to start right now. Okay, today we'll first talk about Harvey Dunn, the man, and Harvey Dunn, the artist. Then we'll dig a little deeper. As a Pierre native, I was first introduced to Harvey Dunn's paintings in Alice Smith's art class while attending high school in Pierre. And okay, but that's when I was first introduced to Harvey Dunn, was in high school. While attending Northern State College as an art education major in the late 60s, a friend of mine and I took a road trip and stopped at South Dakota State College at the time to view the paintings of Harvey Dunn. As we entered the student union in Pugsley Hall, we saw all these wonderful original paintings by Dunn. It wasn't easy getting to look at them. They were hung high on the walls and over the doorways, somewhat protected from student activities. The next time I had the opportunity to see and study the Dunn works was in 1971, shortly after the opening of the South Dakota Memorial Arts Center in 1970, now the South Dakota Art Museum. Following my first year of teaching, seeing his work in an actual gallery setting was a dramatic and made a big impact on me that would stay with me over the years. I accepted a teaching job at the Flanders Indian School in 1972. I then had the opportunity to introduce my art students to the works of Harvey Dunn at the Memorial Arts Center. I actually had the fortune to exhibit some of my students' artwork near the works of Harvey Dunn. With the, Joe Stewart was very kind to let us exhibit some of the student work. During my time at the Indian School, I was involved in establishing the Four Winds Cultural Center, a place to exhibit student work, artifacts, and bring in exhibits. I sought out the Association of South Dakota Museums and attended many workshops and conferences to learn how to care for and exhibit historic artifacts. This began my move into the museum field, first at the Robinson Museum in Pierre, the Siouxland Heritage Museums in Sioux Falls, and finally the South Dakota Art Museum in 2002, where I really got to know Harvey Dunn and his work. One of the first tasks I was given at the Art Museum was to assist Charles Smith and Walt Reed in photographing all of Dunn's works for Reed's book, Harvey Dunn, Illustrator and Painter of the Pioneer West. Harvey Dunn was born March 8, 1884, approximately about 50 miles from Brookings in southeast southeast of Manchester, South Dakota. The second child of 3 children of Thomas and Bertha Dow. Dunn, who had homesteaded the land in 1880. Harvey attended a one-room schoolhouse before entering South Dakota's Agricultural College in 1901 as a preparatory student at the age of 17. Recognizing his talent, his art instructor, Ada Caldwell, encouraged him to attend the Chicago Art Institute, her alma mater. While attending the Institute between 1902 and 1904, Harvey was introduced to Howard Pyle, the country's foremost illustrator of the day. Pyle had his own school and had given several lectures at the Institute. Dunn applied, submitting several works to the illustrator. He was accepted and studied with Pyle in Wilmington, Connecticut, until 1906, when he established his own studio in Wilmington. He began illustrating for many of the popular magazines of the time, including Scribner's, Harper's, Outing Collier's, and the Saturday Evening Post, and for several books. This was also around the time Harvey met Tula Krebs, and they married in 1906. After becoming successful and well-known as an illustrator, Dunn began following in his former teacher's footsteps by the establishment of the Leona School of Illustration with fellow artist Charles Chapman in Leona, New Jersey. Being in Leona was much more beneficial because it was closer to New York and the market for illustrators. And this is a quote from him, "All that I am really doing is carrying on the Howard Pyle idea. Howard Pyle did not teach art. Art cannot be taught any more than life can be taught. His main purpose was to quicken our souls that we might render service to the majesty of simple things. Good fortunes has most certainly been mine, but I count the greatest piece of that opportunity that placed me under the instruction of Howard Pyle." When the United States entered the Great War in 1917, Dunn was 33 years old and a successful illustrator. He was safe from being drafted into the service. However, he was requested, along with 8 other artists, to join the American Expeditionary Forces to record the realities of war for propaganda, recruitment, and historical purposes. He entered the service in March 1918. While serving in Europe, according to several other fellow artists, Dunn went over the top to record the gruesome happenings of the war. When the war ended in 1919, Harvey had hoped to stay in the service to complete his war paintings. He was very disappointed when he was discharged in April of 1919. Harvey only completed less than 40 pieces, but his have been the most memorable. Most of them are at the Smithsonian Institute. Later, he painted some of the war scenes for the cover of American Legion magazine. It was difficult for Harvey to get back into the world of illustration after returning from the war. However, he was a realist and soon established himself in the art business, making contacts with new and old publishers. During this time, the Dunn family moved to Tenafly, New Jersey, where he designed and built an enormous studio a few feet from his house. Saul Tepper, a former student and friend of Harvey's, wrote, "Though he resumed his professional career with his usual energy, he began more and more to turn to his second role, that of teaching. He taught in his studio as well as at the Grand Central Station Artist Student League in New York City and the Tenafly Public Schools. He also did residencies in other parts of the country. Harvey was more interested in teaching those students who had prior training in the fundamentals of art. He figured that his students had the basics down. He stepped in at a higher level. It was to communicate his philosophies and those of Howard Piles to students who were beyond the basics and capable of meeting his requirements." Through his career, Harvey always painted prairie scenes, even back when attending the Chicago Art Institute and in Wilmington, Leona, and Tenafly. His summer visit to South Dakota refueled his interest in depicting the pioneer life as he remembered. In his later years, he devoted more and more of these paintings to these paintings. Most of the time, he would put the finished paintings away separately from his illustrations. However, he did use many as illustrations for magazines and entering other art shows. As a child, Aubrey Sherwood, the publisher of the DeSmet News, followed Harvey's work in the Saturday Evening Post, but did not meet Harvey until the mid-1920s. Sherwood was surprised when he wrote a letter to the artist inviting him to attend the annual Kingsbury County Old Settlers Day that he actually accepted. In fact, he attended the annual event for a number of years. Aubrey traveled to the East Coast in 1950 and visited Harvey. After the artist had guided him around the studio and had shown him a number of his prairie pieces, the publisher mentioned, "I wish the folks back home could see what we are seeing." Harvey showed an immediate interest. In a letter to his former student and friend, Arthur Mitchell, a letter dated July 22nd, 1950, Aubrey Sherwood visited me in Tenafly early in May and suggested that it would be nice if the Old Settlers Day could show 2 or 3 of my pictures, and I suggested that if adequate space, he could go with 30 or 40 pieces. The small town was limited as to a building that could handle a large art exhibit. They decided on the Masonic Temple to display the paintings. Dunn chose 42 framed paintings and shipped them at his own expense to DeSmet. He journeyed out to supervise the hanging of the paintings for the Old Settlers festivities on June 10th, 1950. The exhibit was to only last a few days, but due to its success, it lasted for 14 weeks. It is said that over 5,000 people viewed the exhibit. Harvey had always expressed his interest several times to leaving a collection of his works for exhibit in a suitable facility in South Dakota. The Friends of the Middle Border Museum in Mitchell expressed interest. Due to the time it was taking to build a facility, Dunn changed his mind. He said, again, this is from a letter to Mitchell. I wrote the Friends of the Middleborn Museum at Mitchell withdrawing my offer of my work because it looked so unlikely that they would ever provide a space for the canvases. So when I withdrew my offer to Mitchell, I wrote a letter giving the pictures to the people of the state of South Dakota, the pictures to be kept at the State College, etc. Glad acclaim, cheers. This was in February 9th, 1951. In the July 22nd, 1950, Rochester, Minnesota letter to Arthur Mitchell, the artist stated he was not feeling well, so he had his son Robert drive him out to the DeSmit exhibit, and then he felt rotten and stayed out at the farm with Carrie, his sister, who still lived near the family's original homestead near Manchester. He was to have surgery the next day. In a June 24th, 51 letter, I find that pictures that used to chase me around insisting that I do something about them are fewer than they were, and their clamor is less. In a December 13th letter of that year, things are sure mixed up when I feel that I can paint a picture. I have a few to paint. The old think box doesn't seem to find any, and the old urges go fishing and get ne'er a bite. And it was so different 40 years ago. Harvey died in 1952. His work may have been split up, and the impact of his work may have been lost without his donation. Due to his generosity, he was able to experience a little of the growth of interest in his work and his work before he died. Early in 1952, he visited Pugsley Hall to see his work. The South Dakota Federation of Women's Club made awareness to Dunn's work by conceiving the idea of the South Dakota Memorial Arts Center, now the South Dakota Art Museum. Reproductions were made and sold throughout the U.S. as part of the fundraising effort to build a facility to house and exhibit Harvey Dunn's work. Today, the collection has grown to, I just heard this morning, 146 pieces, and mostly is paintings and drawings. Over the years, the Dunn family has continued to donate the artist's work. A number of his works have also been donated by private sources, and some have been purchased with the help of private funds. Today, the collection at the Art Museum is the largest largest collection in one place. His work can be found also at the National Museum of American History, Smithsonian Institute, Minneapolis Art Institute, Denver Art Museum, the Dakota Discovery in Mitchell, Dakota Heritage Museum in Aberdeen, Norman Rockwell Museum, and basically all over the country you find his work. Today, the South Dakota Art Museum is making every effort to care properly for the Dunn collection, which belongs to the people of South Dakota. It is taking its responsibilities seriously to conserve and preserve the collection for future generations. Through the efforts of the museum staff to secure grants and funds from public and private sources, conservation and preservation work has been and continues to be completed on the majority of the collection. Professional conservatives have painstakingly removed many years of surface dirt caused by smoke and other environmental conditions. They also stabilize the paint on the canvases, and in some cases, in-painted where paint was lost. Nothing is done that can't be undone. When needed, the painted canvases were removed from the stretchers, lined and reattached to new stretchers, and in some cases, when needed, quality frames similar to those Dunn used were added for protection and aesthetics. Well, the conservators studied and worked on Harvey's canvases. They got to know the artist's colors and techniques very well. I want to show this painting, of course, the Praise My Garden. This shows, this painting had been conserved by the conservators. However, before conservation was a big thing, when this painting was donated, it was in very, very bad shape. And I understand that a person, a woodworker on campus, actually pretty much saved this painting by gluing it to a board. And when the conservators in later years looked at it, they weren't going to remove it from the board, so they worked on it as it was and cleaning and so on. But underneath of it is an interesting image of what it looked like while Dunn was still working on it. And you can see, the various similarities and so on. The final product, the mother's face is so, stoic, and it's classier, you might say, than what it was originally. But as was already known by anyone looking at them, Dunn applied his paint thickly with a brush or palette knife, and that on the Praise My Garden for sure, and is this one. In some instances, the paint was so thick the canvases eventually sagged. Extra support needed to be added. Here's an example of what conservators at the Midwest Conservation Center in Minneapolis can do to revive a painting after it had been dosed with boiling water from exploding a radiator at an SDSU campus many years ago. They knew that they could fix the tears on the canvas, but they were doubtful regarding the restoration of the painted surface. They thought they would have to in-paint so much that it would not be a Harvey Dunn painting anymore. But then they found a discontinued chemical that they could use to introduce oil back into the pigment, bringing out Harvey's original colors. So this is what it looked like when the museum got it. And as you can see, when they were able to restore all the color back into the painting. This is actually the painting in the publication, the printed illustration. As you can see, they use black and blue ink. This is why an illustration artist needed to know how the colors on canvas would reproduce with use of limited color. We know that Harvey Dunn was a prolific artist. At one time, it was said that he produced 55 paintings in 11 weeks. An illustration artist had to work quickly in order to be competitive in the field. As I stated earlier, many of Dunn's original illustrations on canvas appear in many public and private collections. However, there are some that have been lost. This could be the result of Dunn destroying some canvases. However, other century artists have made changes to paintings or reworked them, or others have, painted over them. It has been long suspected that Harvey Dunn did the same. While working in the South Dakota Art Museum's collection of Dunn paintings, conservators at the Midwest Arts Conservation Center found pediments or areas of thicker paint that did not match the surface painting. On some paint color unrelated to the current paint show through. Others have unrelated printer notations found on the reverse of the canvas or on the stretcher. The conservators' interest peaked when they received the 6 portraits of the elderly men that were donated to the Art Museum by Harvey Dunn's granddaughters. The paintings required major conservation and restoration work since they had been stored for years in a garage attic. The conservators suggested to the South Dakota Art Museum 2 of the portraits be x-rayed plus 2 of the other paintings they were currently working on in the lab to see what may lie beneath. And this was probably spurred on by the a painting that N.C. Wyeth did. He did this study on canvas of his family that he wanted to paint on the wall of his home. And they saw information on the back of the canvas he used that, something else was there. And that it looked like it was a possible illustration from the Everybody's magazine, it was called. And regular X-ray in 1997 confirmed that it was the long lost illustration. Since the magazine illustration was printed in black and white, it was not known if that painting was in color. But through a very meticulous way of X-raying on the synchrotron machine, they were able to figure out not only what the painting was, but they were able to get through the upper painting and be able to tell that, yes, the painting was colored. And this is that up above is the illustration, and down below is the study that he did. And so I have not found, I understand that they reproduce the illustration in color, but I have not found an image of it in color. One of the paintings that the conservators were looking at and x-rayed was this one of the old men. Here they're working on preparing to x-ray. A sheet of x-ray film are laid on lead pad under the x-ray tube. The painting is wrapped in foam board for protection and is laid over the film sheets, which protected the artwork but did not affect the x-ray process. Multiple pieces of film were used as individual film pieces were not large enough for the entire painting. The film pieces were then positioned end to end with slight overlapping to prevent missing something. The painting is placed up so that the entire painting could be x-rayed at once. The X-rays shoot through the painting and project an image on the film. It is the lead content in the paint that allows the X-rays to decipher an image. After the X-ray process, the film is digitized and stitched together to make a seamless composite to show the entire image of what was below the surface. The result was impressive. The film picked up an image of men and a boat. You can see the image of the original painting more clearly when Dunn used more lead paint, generally white, in more concentrated areas. Les Manfield, a lifelong Dunn enthusiast, recognized the image on the X-ray and located the March 25th, 1939 issue of Saturday Evening Post in which it was published. Oops, I need to go back. Okay. Anyway, this is the actual illustration. And if you want to go back, and you can see that it was really quite visible. Another picture, another painting of an old man, and now this is a picture that was taken before conservation, so you can see what kind of shape it was in. The back of the canvas, you can see the markings indicate that Dunn reused the canvas containing an old illustration. The painting may have been X-rayed before the previous one. The pieces did not quite fit together, but an image does appear. Now here, in the blue line, it kind of shows the images that came out in the X-ray. And here's the illustration that is dated June 28th, 1924. Now here are the two paintings that are conserved and framed. According to the Dunn family history, the portraits are actors living in a retirement home near Dunn's studio in Tenafly. They did not know what year they were painted, but copies of Harvey Dunn's letters to his friend and former student Arthur Miller, recently acquired by the museum from the A.R. Mitchell Memorial Museum in Trinidad, Colorado, verified the information, plus give the year of 1946 that they were painted. In a January 13th, 1946 letter, states that he had done a portrait of a man from Inglewood that inspired to go see if he can get some models from the Actors Fund home near his studio. Some great old heads I saw there, you would get a kick out of them. In a September 25th letter of the same year, he wrote, I've painted a couple old actors and it's not quite made out, and another one in the morning. They are coming out rather well, I think. Nothing great. I'm no sergeant, and I never did want to do portraits. In an October 13th letter, have had some fun doing the portraits of the boys 80 and 90 at the Actors Fund home. Great old guys. It was thought that he brought the actors to his studio, but this letter kind of indicates that he may actually have gone into the retirement home to do the paintings. Now here's another portrait. This is of his Mother Bersha. When they worked on this one, it wasn't quite as successful. Underneath, you can see that some of the writing that was on the back of the portrait. And when it was x-rayed, it was hard to really make out anything. You can kind of make out the actual figure of Bersha, but not anything else. And as you saw here, you know, this is what was written on the back of it. So there has to be a painting underneath. And this is, now this is the article in the Saturday Evening Post. And so one of these images is probably underneath Bersha. Also, they x-rayed fixing fence. And it's also very hard to figure out any kind of an image underneath. But we know through the information on the back that there has to be. Okay, all right. Also, here's the fall landscape. That both of these were okay. On this one, there are several paintings underneath. In the first one I showed you, you know, there's several markings on it, you know, of various illustrations. So it seemed like there are probably about 3 or 4 illustrations under some of these paintings. Here's also dust, and it's not been x-rayed, but there's information on the back of there that hopefully someday will lead us to where the illustration actually is. Here's another one that there are definitely something underneath of them, the thick paint and so on. All right, I'm getting short of time here, but I want to get through this. This is, according to conservators, it appears that Dunn may have reworked or cropped this portrait of Mrs. Gilmore, trimming it slightly on the bottom and top. Judging by the second Dunn signature present at the bottom tacking margin, it is more likely that Dunn merely painted over an existing completed painting. The placement of the signature gives some indications of how much canvas Dunn removed from the bottom of the previous painting, which appears to be about 3 inches. And there are multiple tacking holes present and so on. And again, Les Manfield, who was a big collector of Dunn illustrations from magazines with Dunn's illustrations, and he got to know the Gilmores, who were actually both students of Harvey Dunn. And he remembers, and quote, "As I remember, Helen showed me how Dunn turned the canvas upside down and painted a portrait. Both Gil and Helen told me that illustration it was put with time. Excuse me, both Gil and Helen told me that the illustration was put with time. We forget the things, you know, that she exactly did with it. South Dakota Art Museum continues to collect, conserve, preserve, research, and exhibit the works of Harvey Dunn. By doing this, they will continue his legacy. The museum keeps in contact with the Dunn family and others who own or are interested in his work. They also keep in touch with other museums that own his work. In 1926, the South Dakota Art Museum and the Norman Rockwell Museum developed and toured the major exhibition entitled Harvey Dunn, Master of Golden Age, Harvey Dunn and his Students. In 2018, the museum borrowed several of his World War I pieces from the Smithsonian for the exhibition Harvey Dunn War Works. They've also loaned Dunn works to other museums for exhibition. Through help of volunteers, the museum is locating periodicals and books that contain illustrations from which the museum has the original painting. In 2018, original illustrations from the collection were exhibited along with copies of the magazine articles in which they were used. And today, this is the current exhibit, All Done, the complete Harvey Dunn collection. If you haven't seen it, it's a must. Again, it may be hard to see the details because of the way they're exhibited, but when you put 144 or so pieces in a fairly small space, that's what you get. It's amazing, amazing exhibit. And the museum continues to be involved in various efforts in the restoration of the pieces and really the involvement in, for instance, the Harvey Dunn Society that sponsors the paint out every year in De Smet, and also has been involved in the Harvey Dunn Grasslands Preservation Project and from what I understand, this is the latest piece that was acquired by the museum from the Kelly collection. And it's called Reclining Nude with Floral Curtain. And so I understand that this will be on exhibit in the very near future with new acquisitions. Well, that is the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, I might be able to answer them, but there are also probably some people on board that that can do so. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We would love to have some questions, and you can put those in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that. I was curious when John and I were talking about how works were named, and he said he didn't know, but things like whether Prairie is My Garden was a name that Harvey Dunn had given to the painting or came at a later date. So if anybody on the staff knows an answer to that question, that would be interesting to know.
I don't know if you know this, but wasn't it originally referred to as something like this, comma, my garden? I thought that.
Yeah, something like that.
Of course, with the classic, ma'am, if you have to ask what the title is, I've failed at my job. Somebody asked.
That's right. That's right. And
So
when
that's how we
you
felt about titling.
when you do visual thinking strategy, and that you don't really want a title, that people can figure out, make their own thoughts on what the image is and what is happening in the piece. But you wonder how many of the titles were actually Harvey or somebody gave him the title down the road. Like, for instance, quite a few of the paintings actually have Harvey Dunn's frames on them. But then in later years, you get some of these pretty gaudy frames and that were actually probably chosen by the museum or whatever for the pieces.
Trends in framing.
We do have some questions coming in. The first came from Gregory Bryan in Canada. He is wondering, he mentioned that you had said an illustrator had to be prolific in order to be competitive in the field. Were his newspaper illustrations commissioned or submitted on spec?
Well, I believe that the publishers, gave him an article that then he had to illustrate from. If that's what you mean, I'm not sure.
I think so, yes. Lynette is asking, have all the Dunns in the museum collection been x-rayed?
No, there's only been 4, I believe, right, that have been x-rayed. And I think I showed the 4 that were, there are probably several others that would really be great to be able to x-ray, but it is an expensive process, I understand.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Who is this?
My name is Bill Martin, and I happen to be married to one of Harvey's granddaughters. And I was taken aback to see the portraits of the old men from the actors' home. And how did you happen to select those? Was it the writings on the back of those canvases? And
Yeah, the conservators, it was not only the writing on the back, but also, the paint, where the paint was, the pediments, where the paint's a little thicker and so on, underneath like a solid color. And so it looked like there must have been something underneath.
I understand. Oh, thank you very much. This was fascinating. Alice could not be here, so I have to give her a convincing report. Thank you.
Well, she can watch the
I'm
replay.
glad you could make it. I'm glad you could make it.
How would she see the replay, Carolyn?
It will be posted on YouTube and immediately on Facebook. I'll send her a link, but we'll communicate that out through the newsletter as well.
Well, thank you so very much. I'm going to leave now, but
Okay, we're glad to have you.
Yes.
goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Well, the old men are such interesting, to look at. And I did some research trying to figure out now, how can we identify these old actors? And, at least we were able to figure out when, through those letters, when they were painted. But still, I even called the Broadway Play Actors Guild, or or whatever in New York, and they were kind of at a loss, and it would take major digging to try to find maybe photographs of these people. You don't know their name, or and this sort of thing. That's a great research project that maybe somebody will do someday.
Yeah, I think with the power of Google, we might be able to sleuth something out.
Mhm.
we do have lots more questions, so let's move on to those. Gina Rittenhouse is asking, in which of his periods were his etchings done? Were they early in his career or later?
That's a good question. I'm not actually sure on that.
I'll see if we can research that for you. Connie Giese is asking, I would love to be able to go as an artist to study Mr. Dunn's art and do some studies. Would that be possible? I think Jody can answer that.
Jody, you're on mute right now.
You can come to the museum now. There's a great way to study all of the works up, but people are always welcome to, if they're researching the paintings, the museum makes itself available for people to come in and see things, to dig into our archives. And then there are some, like the Delaware Museum of Art, because he was on the East Coast, there's some Brandywine Museum. They've got, I think, some other kinds of archives on Dunn there as well, but there's resources beyond ours where you can come and research archives, and we make a practice of pulling out collections for people when they want to seriously study. So just get in contact with the museums, and most will open their doors for people to come in. It doesn't just have to be on display. There's usually study rooms. They can pull materials out for you.
We've
Well,
also been
Jody,
inviting...
don't you open up times when artists can come in and actually?
Yeah, I mean, and we had a lot more interest in copyist work with the Dunn show going up and all of the pieces being up. So you can also come and schedule time to come in and paint in front of the pieces and essentially copy them to learn from them.
Good. A couple more questions. Gregory Bryan is wondering if there's any kind of a marker at or near Manchester recognizing Dunn's birthplace.
There is actually a monument there in Manchester. Of course, Manchester was blown away a few years back by a tornado, but there has been a type of a memorial there just off the highway when you turn into Manchester, honoring Harvey Dunn. There's also a historic marker along the highway telling approximately where their homestead was.
And Karen Kinder is wondering if Dunn would hire models to paint from for his illustrations.
Well, I'm not sure, but I'm sure, in a sense, I'm sure he did. He had, in photographs of the interior of his studio, actually, you see a lot of accoutrements for, Western and military, guns and helmets and various things that he used in studying for his works.
If I remember right too, I think in Howard Pyle's school, the students would often dress up for each other to pose for
yes.
different kinds of studies.
In fact, I think you have some photographs of Harvey Dunn actually dressed
Viking.
up like a Viking.
Viking Dunn, yep.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, we're right on time. Great job, John. And
thank you.
I will sign off for the
thank you,
formal
everyone.
program.
Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thanks for sharing this, John. It was really good to see it in this format.
Thank you.
Yeah, and this will be posted to YouTube, to the Art Museum's channel. You can watch it immediately after this. We've been posting this live on Facebook, so a recording is captured there, although to have the captions that don't translate conservation as constipation, which was one of the things that I noticed.
Of course, maybe I said it that way.
Well, no, I heard you just as I was watching it.